Hey guys, Magna back here with some more tutorials. I was just gonna say my name is Magnet, but I already said that. I don't know what I'm doing, but we're gonna be talking about using force fields in PvZ today. We're gonna talk about a few specific timings that you can center around your force field use if you want to try and kill Zergs just quickly and easily. We're gonna talk about controlling and using the sentries properly. And most importantly, getting the best thing out of force field is going to require you to understand positioning of your army and positioning of the Zerg army and dropping only the force fields you absolutely need in order to keep going. So on the surface, we'll just go ahead and jump into the game, but I'm going to talk a little bit more before we get to talking about this particular game. But on the surface, force field basically exists because the units are just not strong enough against Zerg, and that's just to be totally frank. They're not strong enough unless you can bite the army off into small pieces, or unless you have some big tech advantage. So, force fields are kind of the way to take it from you don't have enough stuff to stop all the stuff that they have, to all of a sudden they lost half their army, and all of a sudden now it's a manageable size. So, we're going to see Arthur here against Tudming, and he's just going to run a simple gateway all-in, and I don't really want to teach people how to all-in too much, but I realize that it is a big part of the game, and being able to mix it up is a big component to it. And at least watching these guys use force fields and understanding the way that you can do it is going to be useful. So I was going to talk a lot about Immortal all-ins, but I just realized that I don't want to teach people how to cheese and all-in and be gimmicky, because that just doesn't make you a better player in the long run. But still, knowing how these guys use it and being able to at least understand how these operate is going to be kind of key to developing yourself as a player. So, Arthur asking for a pause, and I don't think he ever got it, so not sure what's up with that. On the Zerg end, right now, nothing too unusual going on other than the fact that it is a 2-base play. I'm not really sure what actually provokes the 2-base all-in here from Arthur. I think it just may have been something he was going to do anyway. And I don't know that Tudming really knows what's going on right now, and he's probably just running a little bit more conservative build on purpose, just because he doesn't really have a good idea of what's happening, since this map is pretty hard to scout on. But up come the gateways right now, and he's going to start moving across the map with just a handful of sentries. So if he were to just just say, whatever, I'm just going to walk out on the map and get surrounded by Zerglings, then this push ends way before it ever even begins. So this is one thing you need to do if you're ever walking across the map with sentries. Is you kind of need to hug walls a little bit so that you can spend minimal amounts of force fields and protect everything. These sentries, they are not cheap. They're 100 gas each, and if you lose it to Zerglings, that's a huge win for Zerg. That's one of the biggest ways they're going to try to decompose these pushes. So really, if you're pushing out with sentries like this, it's all about keeping your sentries alive and using your force fields to do that. So you have to be careful, you have to understand what's coming in front of you, and notice how he even pulls up the ramp just a little bit at the side of those Zerglings so that he can maybe just use one force field to keep them away if he absolutely needs to. But Arthur's going to start slowly moving out here. He's going to add on more sentries, and basically this is his entire army. It's just a lot of sentries and a zealot. So if his force fields aren't good, this army isn't doing anything. So we're seeing a lot of stuff come out here out of Tudming, a lot of Zerglings, and again, he needs to not get caught in the middle of the map here, so he's getting a little bit risky getting this far out. You can see he's searching for an edge that he can use just to try and minimize the amount of force fields he needs. Now that he has all of his sentries out, he can start warping in other units that are going to be more of his long-term damage. So the idea here is that his army isn't really that strong up until he can cut off a bunch of the Zerg army, prevent it from doing any damage, and then all of a sudden it's a large army versus a small army. So Tudming's moving across the map here. We'll note that Tudming does have banelings on the map, and this is understanding whether you should put the force fields in front of or behind the Zerg army. So for banelings, you always want to draw a line with force fields that are between the banelings and you. I mean, that goes without saying. The same thing goes for Zerglings. You want to keep them from connecting. But if it's something like roaches, you want to actually force field off some so that you can let some in and keep the rest out so that you can kill it that way. So he's just moving across the map here. And note the positioning right now. If he has to fight right here, this is only about 4 force fields that he's going to need, maybe even 3 if he can really be efficient with it. And you want to really conserve your force fields the best you possibly can, because right now this army maybe has I don't know, like 11 force fields total. So if he just throws them all down wildly and doesn't do anything with them, then this army sucks because it didn't get the trade it needed to in order to make it work. So I'm going to see Arthur pressing up here. He's trying to get into a small choke, even helping out a little bit with the pylon placement. And this is his choke right here, so he can always retreat back to it. Now that the Zerglings are coming is when he wants to start dropping force fields and prevent them from ever touching his army. So you kind of just draw a line with force fields between you and the rest of their stuff. So the micro here is very important to understand how to do it, and the best way to do it is just to alternate between whatever hotkey this is and then click on the map. A lot of people like to try and use shift, but that just doesn't work. It doesn't work because if you try to shift queue your force fields, you will actually continue to attack or move or whatever you're doing, and then once they're done attacking is when they're going to cast the force field. So you need to interrupt whatever they're doing and just take this and go Z click, Z click, Z click, or whatever your force fields are mapped to. So it would kind of just be alternating keys of like something like that between your mouse and between your keyboard. So I just wanted to make the noise so you can understand what's going on. So this is awkward. Anyway, so we're going to see him kind of draw lines with his force fields here, trying to keep as much out as possible. And notice how incredibly beautiful these force fields are. One Zergling got through, and the rest of this entire melee army is stuck on the other side. From this point, you can try and use more force fields to trap this army and kill it for free, because a lot of times when Zerg gets stuck like this, they'll try to run away and save their units. So you can now drop force fields behind and kind of stick them in a little bit of a hole here and kill a lot of their units for free. So we're going to see Arthur do that, especially on the Banelings, to try and contain those. So he basically killed probably 9 or 10 Zerglings and 7 or so Banelings absolutely for free. It only cost him sentry energy. And he still has force field energy left over after spending all that, so he can still afford to fight for a little longer with these sentries. And because of that, look at the huge supply gap. And he was already ahead in supply a little bit here, but that's because Tubing was playing a little weird. Very simple force field placement here on the ramp. Only one's going to hold off all this army, whereas the rest of the army is tiny on the other side of the map. We can see that it's basically Zerglings coming from one side, almost none coming from this side. So if you just wanted to fight these ones, you could place force fields in the back. It's really just all about minimizing the surface area that melee units especially get on top of your army. And you want to save as many units as possible from those Zerglings. So there's more Banelings here coming through the weeds. He now realizes that 2 force fields, easy peasy. It's going to push these things on the wrong side of the army. And he's lost basically nothing this entire time and killed at least more than half of whatever Tubing has produced in terms of army this game. So if you have sick force fields like this, then you can really just make what moved out on the map just to be 9 sentries and a zealot turn into something totally out of control that's this size of army. And if you haven't lost anything, you can see he's lost 4 units this entire game. And look how much Tubing has lost just because of the great force field control this entire time. Finally, stuff starts to bleed through, but by this point, it really doesn't even matter. He's even sticking units in this little tiny gap between these force field placements, so there's a lot of room for creativity with these. And if you're the type of player that likes to kind of push your opponent around, be kind of a more physical player, then force fields are definitely going to be something that you're going to really enjoy. So GG, Arthur with an absolutely beautiful game in terms of force field control. So that was very cool. Let's take a look at some other different scenarios and take a look at some different unit compositions. And this is the part where I'm going to mention stuff about Immortal all-ins. This is going to be Parting, who basically invented the build and at one point just basically said, I'm going to run this in every single PvZ and there's nothing you can do to stop it no matter how hard you try. And he was right. Back in the day, his win rate in PvZ was something crazy like 80%, and he won championships off of it. He got deep in GSL off of it by just saying, you know the build, you know exactly what it is, and you can't do anything about it because my control is just too good. So it's pretty wild the stuff you can do, and it's all because of force fields. It's not really about anything else other than keeping the units protected that need to be protected and understanding how to place these. So just to note a little bit on the builds, Parting's opening Nexus first into Gateway. By far one of the most greedy builds you can do, so I wouldn't recommend usually copying this, but I think he knows that Sue likes to double hatch before pool, so it's just kind of a little bit of a corner cutting to get ahead, and he just realized that he's right by scouting this pool being so late. So he's just going to go ahead and set up his wall here, and most of the time on these Immortal all-ins, if you can open up with some form of gateway expand that's going to afford you access to a robo a lot faster, and typically the faster you move out and the less you move out with and the better you can control, the better it's going to go for you, because it's going to force them to react a lot quicker than they want to. So here's the robo on the way now. And basically all this build does, if you've never seen it before, it's just going to be 2 Immortals and a handful of sentries, as many as he can produce. He's only going to be on 2 gas for a long time. He's going to take these 2 right now. He's just barely taking them now that his Immortals are started up, just so he can get the extra few sentries out, and just so he can warp in Stalkers once he's out on the map. So he did open up with 2 gas for a while. Decided to grab these a little bit later. There are some variations where you can just stay on 2 gas and they're more zealot based. So there's a lot of flexibility there, but now that he's able to start warping stuff in, you're really only going to spend your money on Immortals and sentries, and then you're going to start moving out once you have a decent amount. The warp prism with this as well is just to keep your Immortals protected in case you start to mess up a little bit. Adding on some extra gateways here just so he can spend his money, and then he'll probably fully wall off here at his wall so that he doesn't get counterattacked. And this is it. This is exactly the army that he's looking for. It's 6 sentries, 2 Immortals, and he made a career off of this. This is literally all he used to do in PvZ. And this is these replays are obviously well after that phase because it's been changed ever since the Heart of the Swarm came out. So what he's going to be facing on the other side is going to be Roaches and Hydralisks. So it's going to be totally different from the last game's Forcefield, and we're going to see a lot of different decision making, and especially as far as the positioning is concerned. So notice how meager this army is when it moves out, but notice the timing when it moves out. He moves out with this at about 8:30 or 8 minutes or so. It's ridiculously fast. It's really hard to handle. And he's going to open up with a little bit of Warp Prism play. This is going to help him protect his sentries for a little longer while he moves across the map and while he gets more units. So just doing some cute Immortal micro here. And again, I know this is about force fields here, but I'm not going to do a video on Immortal All-In specifically, so I thought I'd just throw in a replay from it. Right now the sentries are continuing to build up energy, and the more energy they have, the stronger they're going to be. But you can't wait around forever, because if you wait too long, they're just going to get an army that's way too big. So he's now going to move out for sure at about 10 minutes with 4 Immortals. Warp Prism didn't really do much, so it wasn't really that big of a factor. He's going to start setting up a pylon here. And he's going to start closing off different areas of approachment here. So that's why he's killing the rocks. And he wants to find a good position, once again, where he has to spend a minimal amount of force fields to keep his army protected. So he's going to attack in right here. And that's going to force him to maybe have to use a few force fields right here. And if he starts to have to fight stuff on the high ground, maybe he can spend stuff there. If he starts to get surrounded from this side, he can drop some on the side. He wants to keep it to as minimal force field usage as possible. And again, with ranged units rather than the melee units, what we saw from last game, you want to let some of them through the force field wall and block the rest of them out. So you're only fighting maybe half the army or less at a time. So we're going to see this start to develop here. And by the way, this is Sue. Sue made the GSL finals 3 times in a row. This guy is not a slouch Zerg, so it's not like this is just a bad that he's running over here. So a lot of Zerglings here on the side. These force fields are easy. Bam, bam, block them out, keep them on the outside. On the ramp here, you could cut off all these units from participating if you just dropped one here. And then if anything else starts to come up, sometimes the Zerg buildings can actually serve as a help for you. So you only have to place a force field here, maybe one there, and let them trickle through just a little bit and kill them off one at a time. There's a lot of pretty easy force field placements here, but it's all about recognizing this in real time and being able to control this in real time. So I'm actually going to slow this down. You notice he starts to block off the Zerglings, places a couple force fields down. Now really all he's fighting is there's 3 Hydras on the high ground, 3 Roaches, a Queen, and 2 Spines. Whereas Sue's army is all these Zerglings. There's extra Hydralisks strewn around the map. There's more spine crawlers coming up that he doesn't have to worry about right now. So he's really fighting like less than 50% of the army right now, only because he's just blocking it out with these force fields. So again, he's blocking off all this, he's blocking out the Zerglings. There's a lot of stuff that just can't participate because Parting is able to just drop down these force fields. He's even just placing some force fields on the high ground just to cancel out some of these shots from the Hydras as long as he can. He replaces the force fields here just to block off these Zerglings from the side. Now the Zealots can start to serve as part of the wall. And if you ever have Zealots against this many Zerglings, you don't ever want to let them get surrounded, so you can start having the Zealots as part of your force field wall. So you can drop a force field here, and then the Zealots are only being attacked from one side by the Zerglings, and only being hit by maybe 1 or 2 Zerglings at a time. So there's a lot of different mechanics, and especially mixing in Time Warp with your force fields is going to be useful, but don't worry too much about that, because juggling 2 different casters, if you're still getting used to this, can be really, really hard. Just practice your force field control if you really want to get better at it. So now he's having just to fight melee units. It's just Zerglings and drones. Force fields are pretty simple. Just keep them off your units the best you can. So you can see force fields coming down right here, starting to warp in to help block off a little more. Still blocking off more Zerglings. These Queens can't participate. and eventually he's going to start getting better and better trades. Notice that when he moved out, he was like 30 supply behind, and now he's about 15 supply ahead. Just because he was able to land good enough force fields and could bite off different sizes of the army and only fight different parts or rather smaller parts at a time. Still, just one force field blocks out a lot of these units from participating. He only has to fight about half the army. He can push these Hydras away just a little bit, or he can include them. By this point, he's out of sentries because they've all kind of died to Hydra fire or Zergling fire. And by this point, he's gotten the trades that he needs to. He can actually just straight up warp in regular units and manage this just fine. Also note that the Immortals are the most crucial part of any Immortal all-in, so keeping them alive at all costs is really your priority. Keeping the sentries alive are, of course, a priority, but it's better for the sentries to die than it is for the Immortals to die, because they're representing the power in this type of attack. So you can see him really dominating now, 40 supply lead, and it just continues to grow out of control until Sue finally quits, which is in just a few seconds here. So that's pretty much all we need to see from this game. Let's go ahead and jump into the final one really quickly. And this is going to be more of a macro game and kind of combining force fields with Colossus. And one of the players that's habitually used force fields throughout a really long game is Puck. He's a really good player to watch, especially in PvZ if you need to find out new and cool things you can do. A lot of people in PvZ would start to think of force fields as expendable, and they would rather spend their gas on more powerful units. But Puck just says, no, the force fields are good, and I like to combine them with the rest of the units that I make, and I'm going to make it work, and we're going to show you what he does. So Puck's just going to go ahead and looks like he's either going to Nexus first or Forge expand, depending on what the Zerg is going to do. Nothing too wild here, doesn't see a pull yet, so he can probably just go ahead and Nexus first. Shouldn't have a problem with that. Then he's going to drop a Forge. Right after that, he'll probably drop a pylon or a cannon. And should be a cannon coming down here in a second. Yeah, there we go. Just hold positions on the wall, so he's all good for the time being. Sen, just go ahead and grabbing a third base like is very normal against Zerg. Nothing too unusual so far. We want to get to a point where the force fields start to matter, though. And a lot of times the force field can matter if you want to try and hold your own third base. And that's going to be a big part of this. I'm going to show another video that's all about exclusively holding a third base, but this ought to at least give you a good preview of it, and at least show you that if your force field control is good, then you can do pretty much whatever you want. Most of these have been attacks, and this one's going to be more so defensive and more so for later game play. So he's got a few force fields out, he's got his mothership core out, he's starting an Immortal, but this isn't usually intended to be anything aggressive from Puck's point of view. By the way, if you were parting at 8:30, he was already moving on the map with 2 Immortals and a bunch of sentries. So you can see that that's what makes parting good. Puck only has this much, whereas parting had 3 more sentries and 2 Immortals along to go with this. So it actually does look like Puck is going to be aggressive with this. So this is a little weird because he's adding a lot of gateways here. Yeah, okay, never mind. He does just decide to go ahead and drop a third, but this is a weird way to do it. He's on a ton of gateways, and looking over this again, I have to wonder if this was just to make Sen kind of freak out a little bit. This is strange, but either way, it's nice and safe. So he has an Immortal out and a bunch of sentries. This is going to be kind of a fake poke here. He's not really going to do a whole lot with it, and it's just to make Sen make units while he's not really doing much. Note that while he's moving out on the map, he also does have his mothership here to recall, but mostly he's just going to stay in small areas like this so he can back up, maybe cut off some of the army if they try to commit too hard, and maybe punish Sen for trying to overextend as far as holding this off. So he does drop a handful of force fields here. Notice how he's blocking out this entire section of army from participating, so he can kill this basically for free, and then because he wants to expand behind it, he can just go home after this and just get an okay trade for his money. So didn't quite complete the donut here, didn't quite get exactly what he wanted, and he's down to very few units right now, so he's just going to destroy the rocks. Probably just go ahead and walk home from this point. Not a whole lot much of a reason to stick around, especially if he has a third base coming up. He starts his Colossus Bay as well, and Colossus plus force fields is very strong if you can control it properly. And again, if he ever gets in trouble here, he can just recall. By the way, the reason he's able to do stuff like this is because this map has a ton of tiny little choke points. So you can kind of customize your strategy based upon how many small choke points there are around the map. And you can get away with stuff like this as long as you don't throw units away. So this is going to eventually run out of steam, and Puck's is eventually going to have to go back home. Note that he's trying to bite off as much as he can. Doesn't want to dump all of his force field energy right away, so he's going to collect himself and he's going to recall and get out of here before this thing gets too rough. So he just goes back home. He still has quite a bit of force field energy left over, maybe about 8, 9 force fields, somewhere in that range. Now he can start defending, and anytime you're defending with force fields, you're going to be able to get a lot better things than you should be able to. Gnosis is a pretty bad arc here. He's going to have to spend a lot of force fields in order to hold this stuff off. Because he has the Immortal, as long as he keeps that alive, this thing's going to be a workhorse for him. And he just needs to keep that Immortal protected at pretty much all costs. So this looks pretty bad for Puck. He's down by 60 supply. But nevertheless, it's all about the force fields, and if you can get him into tiny little spots like this where you can cut off most of his army with just a handful of force fields, he's only used 3 so far, then you're going to have a lot easier time keeping your Immortals protected and keeping them shooting roaches. So it looks like he's in pretty rough shape here, but he's getting better and better trades. Now come the trapping force fields, and they continue to extend out the wall a little bit, so all these units are basically not doing anything. They're shooting a pylon, which is whoop-de-doo. That's not really helping you right now. And he's turning an awful situation into a better and better one. The longer this keeps going, keeps dropping force fields just to isolate armies that are not participating in the battle and kill off as much as he can for free. And he's warping in even more sentries. Now that the Colossus is out, they're going to combo really well with the force fields, and this is going to get stronger and stronger the longer you can keep this up. So more force fields. Now that you have Colossus on the field, this is more about keeping this stuff away from the range of the Colossus. He doesn't quite have Colossus range yet, but once he has it, it's going to outrange every Zerg unit that there is, and it's just to keep stuff away from his Colossus. So the force field usage can mold and change over time. That's what makes it a really interesting mechanic. Looks like he will lose his third here, but still, he's getting such good trades, and Sen is committing so much to this, and he's not actually winning the game with it, that it's okay for Puck. Just going to close this off and limit the amount of approach angles from Sen. Still only roaches so far, and because he has this Colossus out, because he has a lot of force fields still, you may look at the supplies and say, Puck is still down 60 supply. How is this really going well for him? And this is just what it's all about. It's about finding the right fights and being able to just control your way out of it with force fields. And this may sound oversimplified in a lot of regards, but that's how these guys got good, is they really just approached these situations, they figured out what to do, and they kind of mastered their craft. So again, killing a handful of units for free, always a good option. And again, if you're out on the map like this, you can't always recall. Realizing that he might get surrounded, he's just retreating here into a little better scenario. He can catch this entire group of roaches for free, so he traps a whole bunch of them in front just to kill us off for free. All these are not participating, so he can zone those out. And Sen just basically has to try to run away here, and you can continue to trap if that's the case. He just killed about, what, 14 roaches and maybe lost a stalker or two? Look at how many sentries are in this army. 15 sentries. This is insanity. This is not something you usually see, but this is just proving the power of force fields if you can really get that many put together. So a lot of roaches still congregating over here, and it's these roaches are fat. That kind of works against the Zerg a lot of the time. Kind of helps you out with your force field, so it's a good counter to a lot of mass roach plays. So Puck, despite being 60 supply down for most of the game, is really starting to ease his way through here, and as long as he can keep biting off small sections of the army with force fields, he'll be in great shape. Starting to get a little bit surrounded here, and you can protect yourself if you start getting these types of situation, just to try to salvage as much as you can. I mean, these units are probably dead no matter what, but if you can just throw down force fields, maybe from here to the geyser, and get the rest of it away, that'll be at least somewhat worth it. So he's going to start doing that a little bit. So he's still doing a really good job with these force fields, and if you have this many sentries and you keep making sentries, you can throw them out and be fairly liberal with it, and that's really all we're seeing here from Puck. So this is a very cool game. You don't see games really play out like this very often anymore. And that's because you don't typically see these type of compositions come down, and you don't typically see people that are willing to stay on force fields for this long. So again, just biting off a small section of the army, this is just the same thing over and over. He's getting better and better trades. What's that? I was down by 60 supply. Oh, now all of a sudden the supplies are basically even, and there's not a whole lot you can do to engage this army very well. Notice that once again he's just trying to bite off small amounts. You can look how much he's sectioning off. All these units back here can't do anything at all because they're behind force fields, and Puck is just saying, you know what, I'm going to kill your army small little bits at a time. As the longer this keeps going, as long as he still has force field energy, he can still take these fights. So this is just putting on a clinic as far as how useful force fields can be throughout the game if you want to stay on that type of composition. Even his Colossus are dead, and it still doesn't matter because he got the trade that he needed to now. He should be on a little better upgrades than this. Honestly, that's the one thing he's slacking on, but his force fields have been impeccable this entire game. You really can't say anything bad about that. So this game is going to end fairly soon. We can see there's another 30 seconds or so, but we're going to go ahead and call it good since we're getting a little bit long on the video. So hope you guys appreciated, or rather not appreciated that. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I appreciate you guys watching it. So it definitely does help out what I do. So yeah, if you guys want to see more of this stuff in the future, just go ahead and leave a comment down there as far as things you'd like to see in whatever matchup. There's also a link to a Protoss playlist that has a whole bunch of other tutorials that you can check out just down in the video description, so look for that. I'll be back in the very near future with more videos, so look out for them, and I'll see you later.